Have you ever found yourself haunted by questions about the mysteries of heaven, the secret battles in the realm of spirits, or what truly happened before the first breath of humanity was drawn? If so, this journey was meant for you. Pause for just a moment and let the gravity of those thoughts settle. Now, before we step into the depths of a story that twists from power to unspeakable horror, join the chosen generation seeking truth beyond the surface, like subscribe to Bible Stories and comment 777 below if your heart ever stirred with curiosity about the unseen. The voice and wisdom you bring to this space become part of a tapestry woven by seekers everywhere, unveiling mysteries craving to be understood. In the haze of ancient Jerusalem, the names Caiaphas and Annas rippled with fear and authority. They were not just high priests. They held a mantle so heavy it shaped destinies, pronounced judgment, and spun a web of wealth and ruin stretching over an entire city. With a single whispered decree, they condemned Jesus to the cross, convinced that the cosmos itself would fall silent at their will. But history has a way of revealing the hollowness behind the curtains of human power. What loomed at Golgotha that day did not recede. Instead, a darkness dreadful and unforgiving emerged to haunt them. Can you imagine living with the belief that victory is yours, only to discover that the clock of divine justice ticks outside of your control? The downfall of Caiaphas and Annas is a chilling warning. No one outruns God's timing. No one escapes the righteous judgment that threads through the fabric of existence. Their fate sharpens the lesson that power, while alluring, can only blind, never conquer, the domain of the divine. Let's take a slow, deep breath before traveling further. Consider the cost of defying God's will. Has judgment ever felt so close that its weight hovered in your own life? This very sense, this stirring within, is the beginning of wisdom, the echo of Psalm 73. Truly God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. Doubt and pride, temptation and truth all converge here as the story unfolds. The ancient world revered visible power, but the most potent force in Jerusalem was Annas, the man cloaked in shadows, orchestrating the heartbeat of the city with a mere whisper. Though many paraded themselves in robes and splendor, Annas was the constant in the web of authority. Subtle, intelligent, and dangerous. He was first appointed high priest around 6 AD, but his loss of the title was no setback. Rather, it unleashed a cunning empire focused on true control. Through careful manipulation, Annas secured the high priesthood for his sons one by one, ensuring a hereditary dynasty. Yet his most masterful move was elevating his son-in-law Caiaphas to high priest, an office Caiaphas would hold longer than any before him, solidifying the family's grip for decades. Behind the scenes, Annas reigned, pulling strings hidden from public sight, mastering an empire funded by coins poured into the temple from pilgrims seeking redemption. What spiritual lessons lie behind such control? The temple, shimmering in grandeur, stood as both a monument to faith and a personal business for Annas's family. Worshippers entering the sacred grounds were met not only by ritual, but by the need for temple currency. Each exchange, every lamb for sacrifice meticulously controlled by Annas, enriching his household through what should have been acts of devotion. Psalm 15 asks, Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? But here, the gates were guarded not just by tradition, but by commerce. Rome's interest in Jerusalem's temple was simple: maintain peace, collect taxes, and let the local priests administer affairs. As long as quiet ruled, Rome cared little for the depth of corruption. For Annas and Caiaphas, the arrangement was ideal, spiritual power feeding temporal greed. Into this system stepped a carpenter from Galilee. Jesus didn't merely teach, he acted. His eyes burned when they fell upon the money changers and the animal sellers. With holy indignation, tables were overturned, coins scattering across the stones, and animals fleeing in chaos. My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. The challenge was direct, the impact immediate. Can you feel the fury surging in Annas at Jesus' words? Not just a threat to profit, but a challenge to authority, a spark in the dry tinder of spiritual pride. When power and wealth are threatened, darkness conspires to silence its adversaries. For Annas and Caiaphas, only quiet, quick removal would suffice. A secret trial, false witnesses, and a swift, public execution. Problem solved, they thought. Yet, in their arrogance, they failed to reckon with an adversary far greater. They were not just fighting a man, they resisted God himself. Imagine standing in judgment before the truth incarnate and choosing wealth, position, and status over salvation. Annas and Caiaphas believed they could erase Jesus and bear no consequence. In reality, they dug their own graves, forsaking eternity for fleeting prominence. If you have ever witnessed God's protection in adversity, let your words be light for another soul. Comment, God defends the innocent, and know your faith may uplift those facing shadows now. Throughout history, the protection of God is the anchor for those who stand firm. Conversely, those who oppose his will inevitably meet the storm. For Caiaphas and Annas, the trial of Jesus became the pivot for their own downfall. How fragile is human power when tested by divine justice. Imagine the scene. Jesus dragged through silent Jerusalem at night, hands bound, surrounded by flickering lamps casting long, menacing shadows. Jewish law forbade such proceedings. No trial at night, no prosecution during festival. Witnesses required to agree. Yet Annas and Caiaphas pressed forward, desperate. Witnesses called forward fumbled their stories, failing to impeach Jesus. Caiaphas, frustrated, watched his careful preparations unravel while Jesus stood silent. Unyielding, his silence a statement louder than any defense. The morning neared and desperation peaked. Caiaphas broke another law, questioning Jesus directly. I charge you under oath, are you the Messiah, the Son of God? The world stilled as Jesus replied, I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The drama crescendoed. Caiaphas tore his robe. The charge, blasphemy. Yet, in condemning Jesus, he was unwittingly fulfilling prophecy, playing his part in a divine tapestry woven through time. Isaiah foretold the silent suffering of the Messiah. Jesus' steadfast silence before his accusers, the manner of condemnation, all part of a plan already set in motion. Can you recall a time when God's justice prevailed in your own life? Comment with, God's justice prevails. Testimony inspires strength for the weary, assures the searching heart. Caiaphas and Annas believed the cross would solve their problem. Darkness fell over the land. 3 hours of suffocating blackness, an unshakable silence echoed through Jerusalem. Earthquake shook the city. The temple veil, a symbol of exclusive access to God, tore from top to bottom. Their power, their connection to God, shattered in one divine act. Have you ever noticed how swiftly God's intervention can dismantle the walls we construct to protect what's fleeting? In that moment, Caiaphas and Annas could only watch as the foundation of their authority, painstakingly built, was undone by a force they had never truly understood. As whispers of miracles and resurrection began to surge, dead men and women appeared in the city, and every attempt to suppress the truth failed. Even the bribes to Roman guards, the lies about Jesus' missing body, could not stem the tide of truth and God's plan. On this journey, the downfall of Annas and Caiaphas is not just history, it is a living parable warning all generations. Power built on opposition to God is not power at all. Their story remains a testament, calling each listener to seek wisdom, humility, and a heart that beats in harmony with the divine. As the sections to come deepen our immersion, let this be an invitation. Reflect, comment, like, subscribe, and let your search for truth ignite a beacon to others traveling beside you. Imagine the tension that gripped Jerusalem the night Jesus was seized, the air thick with the weight of anticipation and hidden motives. The conspiracy orchestrated by Annas and Caiaphas was not hastily crafted. It was the product of fear and political calculation woven into the fabric of their family's rise to power. Beneath the grandeur of the temple and the prestige of high priesthood, a web of intrigue stretched, reaching into the heart of Roman society itself. Caiaphas, bound by the expectation of Roman order, by the gilded cage of political stability, found himself at the center of events that would echo until the end of time. The arrest and trial of Jesus revealed the machinery of corruption. Despite being officially removed from priesthood by Roman decree, Annas still wielded immense influence, respected and feared as a patriarch whose voice resonated through every chamber of power. It was to Annas that Jesus was first brought, a gesture that honored his true place atop the religious hierarchy. The questioning that took place was not about faith or truth. It was about maintaining control, quashing a challenge before it blossomed into revolution. From Annas's house, Jesus was taken to Caiaphas, the hand-picked successor and son-in-law, chosen not for piety but for his willingness to preserve the family's dominance. Here, the plot thickened. The Sanhedrin, the ruling council, gathered not according to the laws they professed to uphold. Instead, the hearing broke every rule of fairness and justice. It took place at night, in secret, with witnesses whose accounts could not be reconciled. Jesus, a simple carpenter from Galilee, stood before them silent, his patience a sharp blade cutting through the anxiety in the room. Caiaphas sensed the unraveling of their scheme. Each testimony against Jesus was contradictory, sowing seeds of doubt among the accusers themselves. In those moments, despair began to creep into Caiaphas's heart, a sense that perhaps the threat posed by Jesus was not so easily crushed by human conspiracy. But driven by pride and urgency, Caiaphas tore his robes in an act of outrage, charging Jesus with blasphemy and sealing his fate. What if, concealed beneath this display, was a spiritual blindness, a refusal to see the truth embodied before them? As Jesus broke his silence only once, affirming his identity as Son of God, Caiaphas and the council condemned him not because of what he had done, but because of what he represented, a power that refused to be bent by threats, a love undeterred by cruelty. It is sobering to witness how justice can be twisted when those charged with its guardianship prioritize self-interest over divine purpose. Caiaphas, charged by tradition and prophecy to serve as a bridge between God and people, became instead a barrier, an example, in the words of Malachi, of the dangers when priests neglect their sacred calling. For the lips of a priest ought to preserve knowledge, because he is the messenger of the Lord Almighty. Malachi 2:7. The conspiracy against Jesus did not end with the conviction. The political forces at play grew even more entangled. Pilate, the Roman governor, washed his hands of the affair, insisting on his innocence. The people called for the release of Barabbas, a known criminal, instead of Jesus, a choice that reverberates with the folly of seeking immediate relief rather than eternal truth. Pause for a moment and ponder. In our lives, do we ever find ourselves in the crowd calling for the familiar, dismissing the inconvenient truth in favor of comfort? Are there moments when the pressures of our world coax us to ignore the deeper voice crying out for justice and righteousness? Annas and Caiaphas did not stop with Jesus. Their opposition extended to the earliest disciples, each sign of God's ongoing movement a threat to their unraveling authority. After the resurrection, the apostles Peter and John healed a crippled beggar, drawing crowds and proclaiming the wonders of Jesus. The authorities, disturbed by their power and persistence, summoned them, seeking to silence their voices just as they had tried with Jesus. Yet, filled with divine boldness, the apostles refused to yield, declaring their allegiance to a higher authority that would not be constrained by earthly rule. Judge for yourselves whether it is right in God's sight to obey you rather than men, for we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard. Acts 4:19-20. What an extraordinary reversal. The rulers, once towering figures, suddenly powerless before the courage and truth of those considered ordinary. Psalm 27 offers this reflection. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? A psalm echoing the quiet yet unbreakable resolve that carried the apostles through persecution. The chapters of Annas and Caiaphas' legacy remind us that the quest to preserve power often leads to spiritual loss. Their conspiracy intended to safeguard a fragile world instead ushered in transformation. Through their actions, the prophecy of salvation for many was fulfilled, even as they resisted its unfolding. As this profound journey continues, consider subscribing and liking Bible stories. Become part of a community that refuses to turn away from difficult questions or uncomfortable truths. Let your voice join those who seek not comfort in conspiracy but wisdom in revelation. And remember, the shadow cast by Annas and Caiaphas is not meant to breed fear, but to awaken the courage to stand firm, to seek righteousness, and to trust in the justice that cannot be denied. The city of Jerusalem, shimmering beneath the sun, appeared at first glance as a beacon of sanctity, a center where countless pilgrims converged, seeking forgiveness and hope. Yet, beneath these sacred stones pulsed the lifeblood of another empire, the hidden dominion of Annas and Caiaphas. Their reign extended far beyond religious rituals. It was a machinery fueled by greed and power, manifesting itself through every coin exchanged and every lamb sacrificed. The temple, glorified as a place of worship, had been transformed into a marketplace of exploitation, where the suffering of the humble funded the luxury of the mighty. Annas, the silent architect behind this enterprise, moved deftly behind the scenes, appointing his sons and relatives to the most influential positions within the temple hierarchy. Nepotism became the backbone of this dynasty, ensuring a continuous stream of wealth and influence, while common worshippers faced staggering costs for sacrifices deemed necessary for communion with God. The simple act of trading foreign currency for temple-approved coins, an unavoidable step for offerings, became an opportunity for profit, rendering every prayer and plea a transaction favoring the elite. Caiaphas, Annas' son-in-law and successor, sustained this system with remarkable resilience. His tenure as high priest was the longest recorded for his era, a testament not to spiritual devotion, but to a mastery of politics and strategic alliances. The position allowed Caiaphas to function as the intermediary between the Jewish leadership and the occupying Roman power. Yet, what seemed a sign of favor was merely tolerance by Rome, so long as the wealth and order flowing from Jerusalem remained undisturbed. Every facet of temple life was tinged with calculation and control. Sacrificial animals required to be spotless were sold within the temple precincts at many times their value outside, with priests refusing offerings brought from elsewhere on arbitrary grounds. The poor who journeyed far for a single moment in God's presence found their resources drained, their hopes dimmed by the systemic burdens placed upon them. It was not merely the exchange of money, but the invisible cost extracted from human dignity. What does it mean when the sacred is profaned, when the house of prayer becomes a den of thieves? This is the question that burned in the heart of a Nazarene carpenter. Jesus, with a courage undimmed by the threat of authority, strode into the hub of corruption and overturned the tables, scattering coins, releasing animals, and pronouncing judgment against those who polluted the space meant for petition and devotion. In this moment, power and humility collided with overwhelming force. Jesus did not resist commerce itself, but railed against sacrilegious innovation, the entwining of profit with worship, turning the sacred into sordid gain. His voice, echoing through the halls, condemned the exploitation of God's people. "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of thieves." The rebuke, stinging and direct, reached the ears of Annas and Caiaphas as a trumpet of revolution. The aftermath was palpable. Fear and outrage settled upon the high priests whose empires had been threatened. It was clear that Jesus was not simply a teacher. He threatened the foundation of a system built on centuries of manipulation. The leaders plotted, desperate to eliminate the threat swiftly and quietly, lest his words ignite the multitude against them. His actions drew a sharp, dividing line between those seeking true communion with God and those who saw faith as a tool for personal gain. The event exposed the inner struggle within each soul, the temptation to twist the sacred towards selfish ends, the ease with which purity gives way to profane comfort. How often are the walls we build around tradition crafted not from faith, but from fear of losing what cannot endure? The cleansing of the temple, far from being a passing scene, became a declaration, an unwavering stance against injustice dressed in holy robes. It invited all who were watching to ask themselves, what are we willing to tolerate for the sake of stability? How deeply do we search our own hearts for the subtle compromises with corruption? As the story unfolded, Annas and Caiaphas clung to the remnants of control, unable or unwilling to understand that their authority was already slipping away, dismantled by a truth too profound for deception to suppress. Their efforts to silence Jesus, to preserve a dynasty at the expense of virtue, exposed the eternal dilemma of human power. It flourishes only in the absence of justice and humility. For those listening and walking the path of faith today, this narrative is not simply history, but invitation. Pause and reflect. Where has compromise crept into the sanctuaries of the soul? What tables need overturning within one's own life? Let the echo of this event call forward a renewal of conviction and a pursuit of the sacred over the safe. Like and subscribe to Bible Stories for more journeys beyond the superficial. Let your voice be heard among seekers, breaking free from the chains that bind spirituality to ambition. The quest for truth does not end at tradition. It begins where the courage to challenge meets the humility to transform. As the echo of overturned tables faded from the temple, a quiet storm raged in the hearts of Annas and Caiaphas. When all attempts to preserve their sanctuary of profit and control failed, desperation drove them deeper into the shadows of conspiracy. Now these secret mechanisms of trial and judgment turned against Jesus, weaving a drama of darkness against the light of truth. Late at night, in hidden chambers, members of the Sanhedrin assembled for a proceeding that broke every boundary of decency and law. Night trials were forbidden, especially during the high festival. Yet the rush to silence Jesus overtook all tradition, rendering the trial not an honest search for truth, but a theater of condemnation. Caiaphas, seething with impatience, pressed for a swift verdict, while Annas, the elder statesman, guided the outcome from behind a mask of solemnity. A procession of witnesses was called upon, yet every testimony faltered, contradicting, stumbling, unable to convict Jesus by the measures of established law. Yet the high priests were unyielding in their quest. Jesus, bound and surrounded by flickering lamps, responded to the barrage with a profound silence. That silence, deeper than speech, unsettled his accusers far more than any argument. Frustration boiled over. Caiaphas, in an act designed to incite the crowd and cement the verdict, demanded Jesus declare his identity. When Jesus answered calmly and with authority, affirming his divine nature, the room was shaken. Caiaphas tore his robes in outrage, a gesture both dramatic and definitive, signaling blasphemy and sealing Jesus' fate. The next act unfolded under Roman jurisdiction, the transfer from religious trial to civil judgment. Pilate, the Roman governor, embodied the world's detached pragmatism. He acknowledged no crime in Jesus, declaring him innocent time and again. Yet political pressure and crowd manipulation won out. The will of Annas and Caiaphas, now channeled through the mob, forced the release of Barabbas, a symbol of the people's desperation for immediate satisfaction over enduring truth. Jesus' final journey was marked by suffering and injustice, a procession carrying the cross through crowded avenues where hours earlier his words of hope had inspired many. The stamp of Roman authority did not absolve those behind the plot, for history holds a mirror up to every act done in darkness. As Jesus hung upon the cross, darkness covered the land, 3 unrelenting hours that felt both eternal and suffocating. The earth itself reacted, trembling as if mourning the injustice. At the heart of the temple, the massive veil separating the Holy of Holies from all others was torn from top to bottom, a sign that the old barriers to God's presence were now removed for all time. In those moments of upheaval, Annas and Caiaphas may have congratulated themselves on preserving their order, yet their victory was a fleeting illusion. Events spiraled beyond their control, hinting at a justice that does not rest within human hands. The world watched as innocent blood was shed, and the temple's greatest symbol was undone not by human hands, but by divine intervention. The crucifixion of Jesus was not the end, nor even the final humiliation for the priests responsible. It marked the beginning of a movement so powerful that it would rise from the ashes of defeat and shame. The lesson was clear for all who truly listened. The machinations of darkness can never extinguish the flame of divine truth. Those who build their lives upon deceit and control sooner or later awaken to the shattering reality that nothing built in opposition to the divine endures. The haunting quiet of Jerusalem after the crucifixion was eerier than the chaos before. Shadows lingered, not of men, but of the choices they made, echoing through generations. Annas and Caiaphas, once architects of consequence, now stood dwarfed by the living memory of the man they condemned. Let this section be a mirror. For when our own pursuits lead us into hidden trials, may we remember that silence in the face of injustice is not always weakness, but sometimes the deepest form of resistance. If this story stirs anything within, subscribe and like Bible Stories. And let community and reflection be the beginning of your ongoing journey. Truth reverberates beyond the verdicts of any earthly power. Its justice remains, waiting to be discovered anew. Section 40. The silence that followed Jesus' crucifixion settled over Jerusalem like an oppressive cloud, thick with anxiety and foreboding. Annas and Caiaphas, for a brief moment, allowed themselves to believe their scheme had succeeded. The problem had been eliminated, the threat to their power crushed. Yet, as the days passed, they found themselves wrestling with a far deeper dread, one that no money or manipulation could dispel. Their victory was an illusion, shattered the moment strange signs began to ripple through the city. Within the temple, priests exchanged anxious whispers as the massive veil, the physical barrier separating humanity from the presence of God, was said to have torn in two during the very hour of Jesus' death. This was no minor accident, but a supernatural event, a disruption of the social and spiritual order by a force far beyond human understanding. In those moments, Annas and Caiaphas confronted the reality that their grip on power was slipping, not through politics or uprising, but through the intervention of the divine. As darkness covered the city for 3 hours, earthquakes shook the ground and rumors spread like wildfire. Graves had opened, and righteous men and women who had died were seen walking among the living. These tales, impossible to control or conceal, struck terror into the hearts of those who had dealt the fatal blow to sacred innocence. Fear spread not only among the common people, but within the exclusive circles of religious authority. The sense of judgment, once wielded by Annas and Caiaphas, now pressed upon them, inescapable and relentless. The priests scrambled to secure their legacy through one final lie. Guards were bribed to spread the story that Jesus' followers had stolen the body. Yet the truth, once set in motion, could not be buried with silver or deception. The idea of resurrection, of death being not an end but a new beginning, ignited hope among the oppressed and spilled over the boundaries of Jerusalem, reaching the ears and hearts of all who had yearned for justice. Pentecost soon followed, and the apostles, men who had quaked in fear, now stood boldly in the temple courts, preaching with a conviction that stunned their audience. Miracles abounded, the lame walked, the blind saw, and the message of God's grace spread such that even former allies of the priests turned toward the new movement. Annas and Caiaphas watched in helpless horror as their influence shrank. What they believed would bring victory brought ruin, and their empire began to crumble piece by piece. Unable to contain what was unfolding, Annas and Caiaphas resorted to arrests and intimidation. Yet each act of persecution only fanned the flames of faith. Beatings, warnings, and prison did nothing but strengthen the resolve of those who had found truth in the wake of suffering. The Christian movement surged with every attempt to suppress it, a living testament to the unstoppable will of God. Beneath their robes, Annas and Caiaphas felt the judgment they had so long wielded turn inward. Their downfall was not just political but deeply personal, a haunting reminder that when human ambition stands against divine will, the outcome is inevitable. The story was no longer about a single moment or a single death, but about the enduring truth that justice, once denied, will always return. To listeners journeying through these ancient corridors, the question arises: what do we do when the walls we trusted begin to fall? When legacies built on half-truths crumble and only the echo of divine justice remains? It calls for courage to stand with the vulnerable, to pursue truth at any cost, and to redefine power not as dominion, but as humility before the greater good. Like and subscribe to Bible Stories, and let the voice of this generation become part of a movement that seeks justice, transformation, and spiritual renewal. The echo of those days endures as a warning and a promise. No darkness is too deep for light to break through, and no lie can silence the truth for long. From the moment of Jesus' resurrection, the dynamics of Jerusalem were forever altered. The city, previously gripped by fear and uncertainty, became the epicenter of unimaginable events that baffled both its rulers and its commoners. The very power that Annas and Caiaphas had clung to with iron fists began dissolving, not gradually, but with a speed that left them reeling. The ripple effect of resurrection sent shockwaves through the corridors of religious and political authority. Guards tasked with safeguarding the tomb arrived trembling, carrying stories of celestial encounters, an angel appearing, blinding light, and a stone rolled away without human hands. The rumors exploded into the city, and Annas and Caiaphas, desperate to maintain control, resorted to bribing the guards. The false tale they spread, that Jesus' body was stolen by his followers, was meant to contain the eruption of hope, but only fanned the flames of divine transformation among the people. What followed was an explosion of faith not seen before. Ordinary men, once driven by fear, now preached in temple courtyards with a boldness that stunned all who heard them. Miracles abounded. The lame danced, the blind saw, and the message of redemption was proclaimed not just to the elite, but to everyone, from slaves to Roman citizens. The former power base, the priestly families, could only watch as their influence slipped away. Within weeks, the city was overtaken by a movement so pure, its origins could not be found in the machinations of men. It was rooted in the uncontainable joy and courage of those who had encountered the living Christ. Pentecost brought a spiritual fire to Jerusalem. The Holy Spirit descended on the apostles, who began to speak with tongues of fire, drawing crowds from every corner of the known world. Caiaphas, once the symbol of strength and order, now found himself helpless before a groundswell he could not intimidate or bribe. His ruling council tried to silence the apostles with threats and imprisonment, but each attempt only made the movement stronger. The very priests he led began defecting, joining the ranks of those who followed this new way. The unstoppable momentum was a living testament that truth cannot be destroyed, it can only be delayed. Rome soon took notice as thousands gathered every day proclaiming a resurrected king. Political pressure mounted against Caiaphas and Annas. Their guarantees of peace, their promises to maintain order, proved fruitless as the city burst with the energy of salvation. The more they tried to stifle the voices of hope, the more Jerusalem transformed into a beacon for all seeking life beyond oppression. The narrative of Annas and Caiaphas warns that the triumph of human schemes is always temporary, especially when they stand against the movement of God. Their influence dissolved in the space of months, proving that even the most entrenched worldly power can be undone in a single season of divine revelation. Reflect, then, not just on the collapse of a dynasty, but on the rise of a new order, one birthed in suffering and triumph, in silence and proclamation. For no amount of silver, pressure, or legacy could stem the resurrection's tide. And just as Jerusalem became a symbol of spiritual renewal, every listener today can step into that same story, to let the light break through the darkness, to embrace truth even in adversity. Let the spirit of transformation that began in Jerusalem inspire a new search for meaning. Subscribe to Bible Stories and let community, faith, and wisdom light your journey as the legacy of hope grows far beyond the reach of any earthly empire. The story of Annas and Caiaphas does not end with their political downfall or the collapse of their temple dynasty. It extends into the shadowed corridors of persecution that gripped the early Christian community in Jerusalem after the resurrection of Jesus. The growing movement of faith and hope became a beacon, but it also ignited a powerful backlash from those unwilling to relinquish control or acknowledge the shift in divine authority. In these tumultuous days, the followers of Jesus faced relentless oppression. The leaders who once commanded the temple precincts now sought to silence this new voice in every possible way. The 12 apostles and early disciples were repeatedly arrested, beaten, and threatened, their gatherings broken up by hostile authorities who viewed the spreading gospel as a direct threat to established order. Yet persecution was not simply an external force. It became a refining fire for the early church. Joy and courage seemed to grow in direct proportion to the opposition faced. Those who had once hidden in fear now boldly proclaimed the resurrection and the new kingdom it inaugurated. Miracles and signs accompanied their testimony, drawing more to a faith that transcended brutality and fear. The martyrdom of Stephen, the first recorded follower of Jesus to die for his faith, marked a pivotal moment. It served as a sobering reminder of the cost of discipleship, but also as a catalyst for the dispersion of believers beyond Jerusalem. Forced to flee, these early Christians carried their message to Judea, Samaria, and eventually to the far corners of the Mediterranean world. What was meant to contain the message instead propelled it forward in unstoppable waves. Among the fiercest persecutors, initially, was Saul of Tarsus, a man who zealously sought to extinguish the flame of this new faith. Ironically, Saul's own dramatic conversion would become one of the greatest testaments to the transformative power hidden within the gospel he once opposed. His journey from executioner to emissary stands as an enduring symbol that no darkness is too deep to be overcome by light. For modern listeners, the narrative of early persecution is not merely a historical footnote, but a call to resilience and faithfulness amid trials. It reminds us that standing for truth often requires sacrifice, but that sacrifice births strength, community, and hope. The early church, battered yet unbroken, forged its identity in these fires, establishing foundations that continue to inspire and sustain millions. As the movement spread, Jerusalem's religious leaders like Annas and Caiaphas faded from influence, overshadowed by the advancing kingdom of God. The contrast between entrenched authority and vibrant faith offers a timeless lesson. True power lies not in dominance or fear, but in humility, love, and unwavering commitment to justice. In closing this journey, remember that the shadows cast by those ancient rulers still fall in our world today, where power seeks to silence truth and corruption poisons purity. But just as the dawn broke over Jerusalem, so too can the light of truth and grace illuminate even the darkest places within us and around us. For all seekers of truth and bearers of hope, continue this journey with Bible stories. Like, subscribe, and join a community dedicated to walking the path of faith, courage, and transformation. The story of Annas and Caiaphas, intertwined with the rise of Christianity, is a profound reminder that no power, earthly or demonic, can triumph over the enduring force of divine love. May this story inspire calm reflection, gentle conviction, and bold proclamation in every heart it touches. The battle between light and darkness, justice and corruption continues, but the final victory belongs to the one whose breath first whispered creation into being and who still calls us into life beyond fear.